Okay. Good morning, everyone, or good early afternoon. We're delighted to have Sarah Sullivan with Arc Jacksonville back today for part two of her transition hot tips. And we are going to just ask everyone to hold questions till the end. Go ahead and put them in the chat, and then we can open up and discuss once she gets through. So, Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for having me again. I love to get the opportunity to talk to caregivers, self-advocates, providers, professionals, whoever will listen to me. I'm always glad to be here. So, we're going to talk mostly about Social Security today because we could literally probably do all of every single one of the lunch and learns on different aspects of benefits and things like that. But we're going to talk mostly about Social Security. And that's a lot of that's because during this time of young adulthood, is there's a lot of different things that fall away and things that start up. So it's really important to kind of understand how Social Security treats minors versus adults and how that can affect eligibility for benefits. So let's get started. So this is just kind of a review. These are slides that we had from the last presentation, but I wanted it to be cohesive and also wanted to give some encouragement is that, that we acknowledge, I acknowledge that life is complicated, overwhelming, confusing, exhausting. And a lot of parents, caregivers, professionals, we always are like, I'll get to that next, tomorrow, next week, next year, whatever. So we acknowledge that it's sometimes difficult and to kind of take the step to um, plan for your loved ones. So it's hard stuff. And I may have shared this, but I'll share it again. If it makes anyone feel better, the last time that I looked at my advanced planning documents, my child was an infant and he's now 20 years old at University of Florida. And so I am also guilty of putting stuff off for a long time. Okay. And I keep on putting off the drafts. My husband keeps on reminding me, we need to look at these. And I'm like, oh, I know. So I get it. I get it. We get busy in the weeds. So okay, so a lot of, when you're beginning this process or resuming this process, you really have to look at what age is the person I'm caring for, or how old am I? Um, if you have an adult child, no matter what their age, it's never too late to start things, to start planning, looking and assessing what you have. It will change over your lifetime and the lifetime of your loved one. Um, Decision-making authority, we already talked about that. That was part one. All the different kinds of decision-making authority, whether it be supported decision-making agreement, power of attorney, healthcare surrogate designation form, guardianship, guardian advocacy, those different things. So today we're going to focus on the benefits part of it. Um, this is also a slide I shared with you last time, but it's important because to me, these are all the different buckets, aspects, pillars, whatever you want to call them. These are the different areas that you need to consider. A lot of times, financial planners will focus on your investments and how you're going to afford things. And attorneys look at legally, how is something going to pass from you to another person, but they're not necessarily experts in employment, faith traditions, medical care, housing, entertainment, like those things. So always keep that in the back of your head, is that there's more to looking towards the future and making those plans. And that begins in the transition 18 to 22, but there's more to it than just financial and legal planning. So government benefits. Really, I like to say that kind of the work that we do here at the Arc Jacksonville, and I think Arcs across the state, is that, to maximize autonomy, independence, and the highest possible standard of living that you can than you can have, right? So with that being kind of the overall goal, you know, let's look at benefits. So Social Security has two pots. Okay, you've got Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI. It's also known as Title II. In Title II, we also have Social Security retirement, survivors benefits, and then the disability, there's this auxiliary benefits like disabled adult child. So Title II covers a lot of different things. So when you and I retire at 67, however old we are when we start drawing down our retirement, it can be 62, 67, 70. There's, you know, depending on what we choose, we're pulling out of that Title II bucket. And it's funds that we have paid in through FICA taxes. All right. So if you notice on your pay stubs, it's 6.2% taken out for FICA. That 6.2% is going into the federal government's Title II pot, and we get to pull those benefits out when we retire. All right. It's either retirement income or disability, SSDI, and your retirement pay, disability pay, survivor's pay, dependent adult child, all of that comes out of Title II. So the reason I make that distinction is because SSI, which is supplemental security income, okay, is Title 16. So it's in a completely different bucket. And believe it or not, even though it's all under the Social Security Administration, those two buckets don't always communicate with each other. So you have to be proactive and not make assumptions that Social Security Administration is going to know when you're retiring and that your loved one needs to start receiving the auxiliary benefit instead of SSI. Like I'm not saying there's no ill intent. It's just that if you want to ensure that you're getting benefits the way that you want to receive them, you have to keep in touch with Social Security, just like with APD and being on the pre-enrollment list, you have to keep in touch with APD. So it's the same kind of thing where they're not gonna, there's not necessarily like a reminder system that pops up in Social Security and they reach out to you and say, congratulations, you're now going to get hundreds of dollars more. You really have to inform them, ask questions, make appointments. And while we're on that topic, you cannot walk into a Social Security office without an appointment anymore. You have to call and make an appointment. You can call the local office. You can call the 1-800 number, the general number, but you have to make an appointment. You can also talk to people on the phone. And I usually recommend that you try the phone before you make that appointment to go in. Because you can usually, you might still need that appointment, but at least you've gotten kind of a good foundation of what you're working towards. So I've actually been at Social Security, our local office here. I've been there for an appointment that I scheduled, and they turned people away that showed up and basically said you have to call and schedule it. They will not let walk-ins come in anymore. So that's important. Another thing is they are really trying to limit the kinds and types of appointments that are made because they're trying to kind of push things to be more, they're pushing things to the website, to individual accounts. And so we're going to be talking here in a minute about hot tips. One of them is make sure that you have your digital login and password. Easier said than done. It's a heck of a lot harder than creating a Gmail account is what I'm going to say. And if we have time, I might even go and show you kind of how difficult it is. But the reason it's important is because it's Social Security. It's your income. It's your Social Security number. It's all those things. So it is encrypted. There are security hoops you have to go through to get your username and password. I sometimes think it's harder to get your username and password than it is to actually, once you have that, get in and get your information. But I will say that there's this kind of general migration to, in fact, when you call and you're on hold with Social Security, they'll say you can get all of your information on the website and log in. And so they are kind of moving to that system. So be prepared for that. So SSI. So SSI does not require that you have a work history. So these are for people that have not worked. And actually for the IDD population that is turning 18 who doesn't have a work history, SSI is more than likely what you're going to be eligible for. Okay. The only exception would be is if had if you paid into the system and could draw down disability pay, or if you have a parent that is disabled, retired, or deceased, you can get on auxiliary benefit. But for most people, when you have a child with a disability who is turning 18 and you apply for SSI, if your child is already receiving SSI as a minor child, you still have to convert those payments. There is a process you have to go through. It is not a continuous thing. There are different listings of impairment for children than there are for adults. So you do have to go through a process to convert those child benefits to adult benefits. All right. So SSI is designed to help those who can't meet their basic needs. I can't get my words out today, which is not great because I'm presenting, right? But we'll do our best. So eligibility requirements. SSI is means tested. They look at your income, they look at your assets, they look at all those different things. So not only do you have to be eligible for Social Security, disabled eligible, right? The definition of disability, but you also have to have limited financial resources to qualify for SSI. So financial resources as of 2025, and actually this is going to continue. This is not changed for 2026. I don't think it's changed for decades, but the resource limit is $2,000 for individuals and $3,000 for couples. And then there's things I have another slide where we talk about exempt and non-exempt, or counted and not counted assets. So we can kind of look and see what that looks like. Income limits. Maximum federal benefit is $967. I think it's going up to $993. It's in the 990s for 2026. So, and that's the max benefit payment as well as the income limit. So it's the same thing. Some of you may be receiving reduced benefits or have a child that's receiving reduced benefits, and we're going to kind of we're going to explore why that happens. And this is something that when we love getting parents that come in when their children are 16 or 17 and say, what do I need to do? Because this is the perfect time to start saying, okay, create your separate bank account for your child when they become an adult. Planning on, keeping everything separate. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But because they count individuals when you're 18 years old, even if you're living in the family home, they count you as a household of one. But what may count or not count as an asset or income depends on how the family finances are set up. So even though they consider the person that's age 18 as a household of one, if you share a bank account, that starts creating some gray area. If you're not paying any rent, or you're not paying your share of the utilities, or it's not clear. So these are all things that as you are a child that's going towards that transition period into adulthood, you really need to kind of prepare. So what is an asset according to SSI? Cash, that makes sense, right? Bank accounts, stocks, mutual funds, US savings bonds, land. Now we'll talk about what doesn't count. You can have ownership in a house. You can either own a house outright, or you can be a part owner of a house, and that does not count. But if you own a house and, for example, inherit, let's say there's 10 people that inherit an empty plot somewhere through some kind of inheritance, that will count towards your assets. And if it's over 2,000, and when we talk about $2,000 asset limit, it's everything. So it's not 2,000 in the bank, 2,000 in land, 2,000 in a mutual fund, it's 2,000 total. So personal property counts except household goods and personal effects. So if you have any rare coin collection, a Hope Diamond, baseball card, like anything that's beyond your normal household goods and personal effects, that can count as an asset. Um, Additional vehicles, okay. Anything else you own, which could be changed to cash and used for food or shelter, and then deemed assets. Deemed assets is when we're talking about if you have other family members that are supporting you, that could be deemed as either an asset or deemed income. Okay. So what's not counted? So this is what's cool is that if somebody's trying to become eligible for Medicaid or social SSI, and there's a reason I made that split because Medicaid and SSI eligibility are linked together. But when you were looking at, let's say somebody has an account with $10,000 in it and they can only have 2,000. Well, maybe they can buy a car because they need transportation. Maybe they can put that money into like a pooled trust or an ABLE account or something. These are things that are generally not counted. So the house you live in, not counted. Vacation properties, counted, right? One car, not counted. Multiple vehicles, anything beyond one is counted. Household goods and personal effects, but nothing fancy, right? Nothing rare and valuable. Bank accounts, Social Security, by the way, does not generally go to your house and check out what you have. Like they don't do an inventory, but if they could find at some point if you're like on eBay trading baseball cards, it could be they could find that. Okay. Bank accounts with less than 2,000 combined. So remember, I said it's 2,000 assets total. A burial fund worth $1,500, prepaid burial plots, life insurance policy with face value of less than $1,500. So the burial fund, you can have a separate bank account that is earmarked burial fund and have $1,500 in it. Okay. Prepaid burial plot, usually you go in with a cemetery or like a funeral home and you can purchase a prepaid burial plot. Those are things that if you're over asset before you apply, you can actually plunk it into these things. I'll give you an example. I had a client who needed to maintain Medicaid eligibility, but her mother had died and she'd inherited some money. She lived in a house that really needed some roof repairs as well as some disability related improvements to her home. So she took that cash that she inherited from her mother that would have made her ineligible, right? Because it was over 2,000, and she plunked it into her house. And by putting it into her house, which is an exempt asset, she got what she needed for the house, and then she maintained her eligibility for her Medicaid and SSI. So there are ways to do these things where you have what you need. They're not counted as assets, but anytime you go over that $2,000 limit, they're going to make you ineligible. We actually have a gentleman who works here with us, and we thought maybe that his SSI and Medicaid got shut off because he was working too much. And then we realized that it was because he was over asset because his mother has always deposited his SSI check into her account. And at some point, they're like, look, we're counting the whole account because you can't separate it out. And I'm like, there's got to be a way to solve this, right? So they will kind of look at things like this. That's why it's good to have a separate account. Like, why even tempt fate as, to have them, why make them work hard to make you eligible if there's a simple solution in creating an account? Social Security is also going to well, they've had it for a while now, but they have this, they have like a card where it doesn't go necessarily into a bank account. This is for people that don't have bank accounts. It goes into this account and then you have a card. And think of it as almost like a prepaid Visa. So it has the monthly amount on it. Once you spend it, you're done. But it does, there is the ability, if you have that difficulty in separating it from the family account, or you don't have a bank account, that is an option as well. So Social Security has a solution for that. And you can go online and kind of see what is being spent on, and you can see when it drops. So it kind of operates like it definitely operates kind of like a prepaid Visa, and kind of like a bank account. So you can kind of see, you can't deposit onto it, but you have every month when you get that deposit from Social Security, it's in there and you can see when things are spent. Okay. So SSDI, and I know we are doing a very broad brush today. We are not going into the weeds with SSI or SSDI, because you could probably spend weeks, months, years coming through all the information on ssa.gov. So what I generally do is if I have a very particular specific question, I would go to ssa.gov. But this is very general stuff just so you can kind of understand the difference between the two programs. Social Security disability insurance, the payments come from the Social Security Trust Fund based on a person's earnings. It used to be, now remember I said Social Security is going digital. For years now, they haven't been sending out the paper mail out of your earnings. It used to be you would get this kind of 5x7 fold over that was stapled and mailed out to us from Social Security. You would open it up, it would say, here's your record of earnings since you started earning, right? And for me, it goes back to like when I was 16 years old, right? When I started my first job. And then it will say, if you become disabled now, this is how much you would get. If you wait until 62, this is how much you get. If you wait to full retirement, this is how much you get. So that's a statement they used to send out. Now it's available online, but obviously you have to have that login and password to access it. But it's important because you can kind of see your earnings and also check and see if there's anything inaccurate. Anytime you're applying for Social Security or applying for a different benefit, Social Security gives you an opportunity to, for example, if you got like a cash job or something like that, they invite you to report any other income. So it is possible to change those kinds of income. Obviously, you have to pay taxes on it too. So Social Security disability insurance. It's an insurance that workers earn by paying Social Security taxes. There are rules as to how much you need to work. Those rules change depending on your age. So if you were younger, you have to pay in fewer quarters. As you get older, you have to pay in more quarters or credits. But for, let's say someone that's going towards retirement, the general thing is 40 quarters, 40 credits, which is generally 10 years of work. You can earn 4 credits in a year. You do not have to work all 4 quarters of the year to get those credits. The credits have a monetary value. So as long as you make X amount of dollars in a year, I want to say credits are usually about 2,000. I should probably look that up. I'll let you guys know. But basically, if you earn that much in a year, you earn your 4 credits, whether you do it in the first month, the first quarter, the first half of the year, it doesn't matter. I say that just because quarters and credits are kind of interchanged for terminology. The quarters kind of implies that you have to work each quarter to earn the credit, and that's not the case. So what SSDI does is it pays benefits to disabled individuals who are unable to work. And you have to, when they say, are you able or unable to work, they look at substantial gainful activity, and that's SGA. So for example, the definition of disability is you are unable to engage in substantial gainful activity for a period of 12 months or more with a condition that can result in death, or so there's this whole kind of 2-step process where they first look at, are you able to engage in SGA, which means can you make up to it's 1620 for this year, $1,600 a month. If you can't, then you're considered, and you have a condition that either lasts in death or lasts for at least 12 months, then you're considered disabled, right? So SGA has a monetary value, and that becomes important. You've got it when you're working with a disability, because if you go over that amount, you could put yourself at risk for losing your benefit. And that happens with a lot of our, it's happening more and more actually, because we've got a lot more people with disabilities that are in the workforce that may be working part-time, and might be in lower wage or lower earning jobs. And they rely on their SSD to survive, but they do like to work, and that working actually continues to pay into their retirement account. So it's important to kind of understand where the pitfalls are. Okay. So along with SSI, I mentioned this earlier, SSI is paired with Medicaid, SSD, as well as auxiliary benefits, disability benefits, and retirement and death benefits all come with Medicare. Okay. So if you kind of are trying to figure out the difference between the two, Medicaid goes with SSI, Medicare goes with SSD. There obviously are exceptions. There's people that are dual eligible. We're not going to go into that today, but just it kind of helps you understand from a black and white perspective, Medicaid SSI, Medicare SSD. With Medicare, if you become disabled, you have 2 years before you get from the date of disability determination before you actually receive your Medicare benefit. All right. And that is not the same. So for example, if with Medicare, once you hit 65, you're eligible. If you take early retirement at 62, you could potentially get your, you still have to wait till 65. If you become disabled at 62, you might get your Medicare at 64. So if that kind of gives you kind of an idea of how that works. So substantial gainful activity, or SGA, you like to say. It's defined by the level of work activity and earnings that an individual can engage in while still being considered disabled and eligible. All right. So you go over that amount, then you are considered, you're not disabled anymore. All right. Does the person have the capacity to support themselves through work? Now, most of us know that 1620 for 2025, 1690 for 2026, monthly is not enough to live off of, but that is the number they've given us. Every year they put out these amounts of what is SGA. An individual's monthly earnings, if they exceed the SGA thresholds, it's presumed that they have the ability to support themselves. So if you are receiving SSD and you are working, you need to make sure that you are not bumping up to that 1690. Okay. Now, if you do, and you're able to support yourself, great. But when we're looking at maximizing what you get, if you're not able to maintain that SGA for 12 months at a time, then I recommend that you're just very careful about the hours that you're working, what you're earning, because you want to preserve your SSD payment as well as you want to maximize it, right? You don't want to give up that disability payment until you're truly self-supporting. So these are kind of practical considerations in the next several slides about like what to know when you're applying, knowing what you're applying for. A lot of times you might do a dual application and people won't understand that it's a dual, and they'll get a denial for one and they'll be like, well, I got denied. I'm like, well, look at the top of the sheet. Is it SSI or is it SSD? Because there's different headings because they're two different departments, right? So sometimes you just have to be careful. You might get rejected or denied for an SSI application, but your SSD application is still pending. What to know when working while disabled. Remember, we're going to talk about those SGA limits and what they look like. and then what to know when a parent becomes disabled, retires, or dies. And then we're going to talk about some hot tips. And I'm also going to throw in a chronology that talks about kind of what to do and when for the transition period from youth to adulthood. So what to know when applying. When you were applying for an 18-year-old, by the way, they don't let you apply until 18 years, 1 month. Okay, not 18, not on the 18th birthday, 18 years old, 1 month. You could schedule that application. You usually do it over the phone. You can schedule that ahead of time. You could, but they generally will not take an application on someone who is 18 until they're 18 years and 1 month. Okay. That 1 month, you're like, why is it that way? It's because they look backward when they're looking at the benefits. Okay. So whether applying online or by telephone, it's important that the applicant kind of understand that they are a household of one. Only the applicant's income, all right? So not the parent's income or the roommate's income or a sibling's income, only their income. And a lot of times if they're applying for SSI as an 18-year-old, they have zero income, and that's okay. Only the expenses of the applicant. So not the expenses of the parents, not the expenses of the roommate, not the expenses of the siblings, okay? Only the assets of the applicant, not the parents, not the roommates. And this means you need to have a separate account for your loved one, okay? The applicant needs to have a separate account and have income and assets that are separated. The Social Security is going to ask if you have an account at the time of application. Most parents are kind of surprised, blindsided. They're like, well, I was going to get one when I got my benefit. They actually take that information. They can take it at the very initial application stage. So I say, why not have it ready? The other option is the Direct Express pay card, which I talked about, that acts like the prepaid Visa. So you can, they will ask you during that initial application, do you have an account? If so, give us the account number and information. Doesn't mean you can't do it later, but why not give it to them right off the bat? And then the other option, if you want to choose it, is the Direct Express pay card. Maria Duque, who works in my office, she chose to do the Direct Express for her son, and she says it works like a charm. She likes it. It's easy. So, you know, it's really kind of whatever fits your family and your situation. You need to have all diagnoses, evaluations, and medical providers available at the time of applying. Okay. This is where parents get into a situation, or applicants get into a situation where they're facing an appeal or a request for reconsideration. It's not because they're not disabled, it's because they didn't provide enough information during the application process. So usually what'll happen is, and Social Security has access to provider names and things. So usually what you do is you say, okay, our primary care provider is Dr. Brown with Baptist Primary Care. And they'll say, oh, we see Dr. Brown Primary Care, is this address? Yes. So that's kind of what they do, but you need to have all of it. Okay. Social Security is not going to go searching for medical documentation to support the disability application. That is up to you. Okay. So evaluators, even if your child's 18 and the evaluation did the diagnosis back at age 3, you have to give them that provider name, that information. Okay. So medications, you know, and when I'm saying medical diagnoses, medical records, I'm talking if they have physical therapy, occupational therapy, ABA therapy, you know, if they have, you know, some kind of therapy that's provided through school, through an IEP, if it's a provider, like all of these things need to go into your application. All right. Living arrangements. We're actually going to have a full slide on this, but living arrangements are tricky, especially because obviously the person with a disability is considered a household of one, but might be living in the household with the family. So wait a minute, how do we do that? You know, how do we avoid, you know, deemed income or deemed assets and all that kind of good stuff? So it's very complicated how they count these things. And so so complicated, it deserves its own slide. So let's get into it. Is everybody ready for math? I'm not good at math, so I can't guarantee that it's going to make sense. So what I see the most of is parents of children who started their SSI right around the age of 18, and their benefit is reduced based on in-kind support, right? And that in-kind support is that they're living free and clear, rent-free. So if you live in another person's house, apartment, or mobile home, and you pay less than your fair share, and remember, fair share of housing costs, they look at the fair share. If you live in your own house and someone else pays for your rent, they will consider that. Obviously, if you're in a more institutionalized setting like a hospital or a nursing home for the entire month, and Medicaid pays for 1/2 of the cost of your care, that counts. If you're a minor child in a hospital and you're there for the whole month, that also will go into in-kind support, or if you're in a public or private medical facility, okay? So you see a theme here is that if someone else is paying for the housing, then they will count that as in-kind support, and that will reduce SSI. It does not have an effect on SSD. It only has the effect on SSI, okay? So the in-kind support and maintenance, food, shelter, or both, somebody else provides for the beneficiary, okay? And if somebody helps to pay for the rent, it counts. So anything that someone else is helping with, that's going to reduce. So what we see a lot is that parents rely on that SSI income, the full amount, to pay the bills, but they don't do a really good job of showing how that person individually is contributing. So Social Security is not going to just assume if you're, have a family and you've got family expenses, that the person with a disability is paying their portion. You have to show them how, very specifically, they are paying those expenses. So some of the ways you could do that is a fair share agreement where you kind of say, so-and-so, the person with the disability, the applicant is paying this for rent, this for this, their fair share of the total household expenses. And then Social Security will do with it what they will. You could do a simple rental agreement. So there's different ways that you can show Social Security that what they're getting in SSI is going to contribute, is going to be the fair share towards the household expenses. So here's the math part. So if you live in another person's household and share expenses, so I'm going to give you examples. You live with your sibling and 2 other adults in a home, your sibling is buying, and your only income is SSI, okay? So I'm applying for SSI, I move in with my sister, she has 2 roommates, so there's 4 of us in the house, okay? Mortgage is $900 a month for everyone, not each, total. The average monthly bills, $300 for electricity, $200 for water, sewer, $200 for gas. Okay. So $1,600 total monthly expenses. I tried to do easy math here. Okay. Because there are 4 people, the share of expenses is $400 per month each. So if you pay your full fair share of $400 for the household expenses, there will be no reduction of your benefit, and you're going to get the full $967. Okay. If you pay less than $400, then you'll be receiving in-kind support and maintenance, meaning they're paying part of your fair share. And Social Security applies the 1/3 reduction rule, and the $967 then is reduced by $322.33. So the SSI payment actually gets reduced to $644.67. Okay. So usually when I'm talking to a parent, I'll say, oh, do they get the full $967? They'll say, no, they get $600 and change. And the minute they say that, I know what's happened, right? They've had this 1/3 reduction rule. If you live alone in an apartment, okay, and your sibling pays your rent. So you're living by yourself, but somebody else pays your rent because obviously rent is expensive, right? Social Security counts as in-kind support and maintenance. So although the rent is 800, Social Security limits how much of the 800 is counted, and they look at the presumed maximum value. This is why this stuff is complicated. So the presumed maximum value is 1/3 of the federal benefit rate plus $20. I don't know why they come up with these formulas. They just do. So let's look at the step here. The federal benefit rate is 967. That's the max amount of SSI. 1/3 is 322.33. So plus $20 because they just throw that in. And 342.33 is the PMV of in-kind support and maintenance. There's a general income exclusion and the amount the reduction due to in-kind support and maintenance. So at the end, we take the 967 minus the reduction due to in-kind support, and you get the 644.67. So this comes out with the same result, but for different reasons. And I want you to understand, you don't have to memorize these formulas, but just understand, depending on your particular fact situation, is you might get a 1/3 reduction because a person's not paying their fair share, or it could be because their rent is being paid for and they look at the presumed maximum value. So there's different rules depending on a person's situation. They also can look at the value of the house. For parents that live, or for families that live in houses with high mortgages, Social Security, no matter if the person has a fair share agreement or a lease agreement, if that person's fair share can't possibly be like the fair share, like let's say the mortgage payment is $3,000 a month and they're paying $400 a month and there's only 4 people living in the house, they're probably going to provide you with that PMV. They're going to reduce it. So just FYI, they will also look at the expenses of the living arrangement. And I know this is probably making your head swim a little bit. It makes my head swim. What I normally say is, what's your situation? What are all the expenses? And then I look and figure out kind of like, is this the PMV rule? Is this the 1/3 rule? Like, what is this? So then we can kind of figure out why it's happening and kind of suggestions to the applicants or the recipients of SSI and say, this is how you can maximize what you get. Usually the first thing is have a rental agreement or a fair share agreement. You know, a lot of times parents just don't have that because they're thinking this is my kid living in my house with me and they've lived with me forever. So let's shift a little bit to working while disabled because this also contributes to the reduction in SSI. It does not necessarily, it does not reduce SSD. Okay, it reduces SSI. So the moral of that story is if you have a adult disabled child and you're receiving disability or retirement, or one of the parents is deceased, you should inquire about your child getting an auxiliary or survivor benefit through SSD because you do not have the same means tested reductions, all of those kinds of things. You just get your monthly payment. And the monthly payment is usually 1/2 the amount of the primary beneficiary's payment. It doesn't mean that the primary beneficiary gets less. It just means that the person with a disability or the auxiliary beneficiary gets 1/2 of the amount in addition to the primary getting their full benefit amount. Okay, so let's go back to working while disabled. We want to, whoops, sorry, I went backwards. Obviously, working is a great day activity. It's great because if you work, you pay wages into the Social Security system, which could lead towards, getting early disability or retirement payment when you get older. So there's a lot of really great reasons to work. However, sometimes, especially if you are either rep payee or are working with a person who's receiving SSI, reporting wages, all of that can get really complicated. So just remember this. For every $2 somebody earns, so earned income, meaning from work, it's only reduced by $1 from SSI. And there's a $65 disregard. Okay. So this is called the earned income exclusion. So Fred makes a minimum wage, $14 an hour, and works 10 hours per week. Fred receives $967 per month in SSI. Using the earned income exclusion, there's $600 of earned income. Okay. There's the $20 general exclusion. There's a $65 earned income exclusion. So you're left with $515. That's if you're calculating his earned income, it's $515 divided by 2, which is $257.50. Okay. SSA always rounds down. So 967 minus 257.50 equals 709. Okay. So his SSA, or sorry, his SSI is going to be 709. And you're like, wait, that stinks, because he works and then he got docked for working. But if you take what he earned in work, which is the $600, and you add it to the 709, instead of getting 967 and not working, he's working and getting a gross at the end of the month of 1309. Okay. So yes, there are rules. There are things you have to report your income. You have to, if you work different hours every month, it's going to be a different reduction every month. But if you work, realize that you get to maintain some of those SSI benefits and also earn income, which usually you end up in the black. All right. So I say that SSDI completely different. All right. So SSDI, you do not have this 2-for-1 reduction. Your SSD does not get reduced based on the wages because it's not means test. It's money you have paid or someone has paid into the system on your behalf, and you're drawing it back out. Okay. So you must be insured based on contributions made to FICA, and it's for your own earnings or those of your spouse or your parents. I have some workers as young as like 26, 27 years old that started working when they were 15 or 16, and they're already earning their own SSD. It's not a lot, but they're earning it because they paid those wages and they were younger, so they had to give fewer credits. Okay. They became insured at an early age. And I spoke about the credits. So 2025, one credit is $1,810. And if you earn $7,240 or more in an entire year, you will have earned all 4 credits. Okay. So if you have a child that's working and you want to encourage them to earn those credits, make sure that they at least, because those credits, if they become disabled, count towards their eligibility for SSD as well as how much they earn. The more you earn, the more SSD or retirement that you get. You guys all know that. So generally you need those 40 work credits with at least 20 of them earned in the last 10 years. However, like I said, younger wage earners that become disabled earlier in life might have fewer credits required by Social Security. Okay. People working and receiving SSDI, however, okay, so you're not going to get reduced dollar for dollar or 2-for-1 like you do with SSI, but they are paying attention to what you're making, right? So if you 1620 for 2025 going up to 1690, you have to stay below the SGA or else Social Security will think that you're able to support yourself working full time and you're no longer disabled. There's a whole process of a trial work period and all kinds of other crazy things. There are people that do this work with Social Security. We have a benefit specialist, Center for Independent Living. There's other people that have these kind of specialized case managers that will look at your particular situation. just know that working and receiving SSDI, if you're making over 1620, 2025 or 1690 in 2026, you could trigger that trial work period, and it could over time lead Social Security to believe that you're able to work and not be disabled anymore. Okay, really quick, ways to reduce that amount is impairment related work expenses. There's this thing called the Red Book. You can go to ssa.gov and look up Red Book, and it gives you all kinds of useful information. But if you have IRWI, you can deduct it from your gross income, and Social Security won't count that. So it includes out-of-pocket expenses. Think of anything potentially work-related, okay? Computer support services, durable medical equipment, clothing, anything, service animals, assistive technology. All the cost of that can be reduced, can reduce your gross income. Medical services, co-pays, those kinds of things can also be done. The expense must not be reimbursed by any other source, okay? And I give an example down here. Ellen's receiving $10.25 per month. She received $250 per month for special transportation related to work. She's able to deduct her general exclusion, then the earned income exclusion, then the $250, total $690, right? So this is where it's really helpful with SSI in that, let me go back really quick, that you've got, it actually, if you can report the impairment related work expenses, you actually get less of a reduction on your SSI. And by working, you're working towards those credits for Title II benefits in the future. And I know we're running, see, this stuff is complicated. We're running close on time, so I'm going to run through this pretty quickly. But children with a disability, even if they're adult children, can earn an auxiliary benefit from a parent who is disabled, retired, or deceased. I know I've said it several times during the presentation, but I just want to go, if you don't actually make a choice between SSI and SSD, if the SSD benefit is there, Social Security wants you to get that SSD auxiliary benefit. So if you have a change in circumstance, let's say your child's getting SSI, one of the parents dies, retires, becomes disabled, you should call Social Security and say, hey, we've had a change. And what will probably happen is that disabled adult child will now get that 50% benefit off of the parent with a change in circumstance. By the way, disability is determined by SSA's listing of impairments. The definition of disability for SSA may be different from what APD uses, may be different from what IEPs under the IDEA use for school settings. Everybody has a little bit of a definite definition. So don't assume that if you're eligible for the iBudget waiver, that you're eligible for Social Security and vice versa. You have to provide documentation that meets the definition for the agency that you're applying to. And then Medicaid and Medicare, I've kind of already gone over this. Medicare goes along with SSD, remember, and Title II. Medicaid goes with SSI. I always say, how do you remember? I say care for the elderly, aid to the poor. It's kind of the easiest black and white way. It can get gray in there, but we're not going to go into the weeds with that. You can have both. They're dual eligibles. Many people, adults with disabilities, have both. And if you came into Medicaid through SSI and transitioned to an auxiliary benefit, even if you're no longer actually receiving Medicaid, you are still Medicaid eligible. So that's important to know because people are getting stuck with iBudget and the new pilot program with their Medicaid eligibility. Those are what they call Title 19 Medicaid eligibility benefits. Then really quick, hot tips. I'm going to provide a PDF form of this presentation so that you can kind of look at all these hot tips, but it's nothing we haven't talked about. Get your login.gov username and password. Have a fair share agreement or a rental agreement. Be aware of the means testing. What's an exempt asset versus something that's counted. Know that applying for SSI is a lengthy process. The more and better information you provide at the beginning, the less chance you're going to have um, to file an appeal. Attorneys do not get involved until the fair hearing process, which could be 9 to 12 months into the process. So it's always good to provide the best possible application up front to avoid having to go through the appeal process. Also, listings of impairments, absolutely accessible to anyone that looks at ssa.gov. Doesn't hurt for you to pull that up before you apply so you understand what SSA is using to consider whether or not you or your loved one is disabled. That's what I do. I treat it like a legal brief. I take the listing of impairment, I take the facts of the medical documentation, and I match them when I'm helping someone apply. And that's usually served me well and served the people well that I've helped throughout the years. So I always say make it easier for people to find in your favor, whether it be a judge or whether it be Social Security. So here's a good timeline. I'm just going to let this sit here while I answer some of your questions, but this is kind of the timeline. And I kind of look at the 14 to 22 age frame. We're talking about transition. This is kind of a timeline for when you should apply for what and be prepared to apply for things if you've got a child that's going from youth to adulthood. So Dustin, hit me with questions.
So if anybody would want to unmute and ask a question, if you waited till the end, I really appreciate that. There are no questions in the chat right now. So again, if you want to unmute and ask some questions because you waited patiently, I really appreciate that, and go ahead. It's a lot of information. I'm sure usually we have questions.
I know. Yeah, I know we do usually have questions. And I know it's like this stuff it's really hard to even break it down into little consumable bites. So maybe a show of hands of who's overwhelmed with all the information.
You can use the little raising hand emoji.
The raising hand. So
Here
there are okay, good.
We just got one from Rosa. If a child is not working but is still in high school, should they wait until they graduate to apply?
So when you apply for a child under the age of 18 for SSI, they look at the income of the entire family. That's why when they turn 18 and they treat that 18-year-old as a household of one, it's so significant. So from 0 to 18, Social Security has childhood listings, which differ slightly from the adult listings. So a lot of parents will apply for their child immediately upon learning that they have a disability. They'll get denied for SSI, and then they'll think they're never going to be eligible again. So it does not hurt to apply for a child under the age of 18, but if the child is living with a family and there's income, they're going to look at the entire family to determine that financial eligibility. So if you think that that child is not going to be eligible because of the financials, then waiting until 18 years, 1 month is probably the best way to go.
Okay, thank you,
That was
Sarah.
a really good question. Yeah.
And thank you, Rosa. Anybody else would you like to unmute or just raise your hand or type anything in the chat? We will send out, as always, we will send out more resources and information from the meeting. We will have the recorded meeting, the link to our YouTube channel will be in our email as well. And if you would like to request a certificate of attendance, you can request that by sending me an individual email. And again, if you do have any questions, we have a few minutes to answer some.
So I will say this stuff is complicated. There are people out there that, my department here at the Arc Jacksonville, there's Center for Independent Living. The rehab sometimes will have what they call navigators or people that are able to assist with Social Security. Another thing to understand is that you can always do an administrative appeal with Social Security. And you can always, like if you get notice of an overpayment, there are a couple of different ways you can address an overpayment. But the best thing, obviously, kind of the overarching theme for today is if you apply with all the information up front, you have a better result. If you report those wages as you're working, if you're required to report, you get a better result. These are things where it is complicated, but if you're looking at, I think I had an example where you're making $1,000 a month versus $1,700 a month because you're working and getting SSI, it's worth it. And also just try, if there's any way that the person with a disability is eligible for, can receive SSD, inquire about it. Anytime you have a major life change in your family situation, whether it's a retirement, a divorce, a death in the family, it's always good to look at your plan, all of your benefits, and see if there's a change that could benefit your family. On that note, any other questions? Last call.
No, we just have Jennifer said thank you, and Tammy Watkins said great information, well presented. There is a lot with Social Security and all of the rules and stipulations, and if if you make too much, then you'll lose stuff. It's just there's a lot to
It's
it.
a
So
lot.
it
Yeah.
is a lot.
But I always want to encourage people, so especially persons with disabilities, as they're looking at, am I going to work? Am I going to do a TAPE program? What am I going to do as I'm growing up? I say work. Work if you can, because
Mhm.
the more you work, the more you pay into the system, and the more you have something to rely on when you're older. I know a lot of these parents will say, well, why would I have my child work if it's going to cause this big problem with SSI and all these reductions? I always say if you're able to work, and you can kind of stay under that SGA limit, you're really setting yourself up for kind of a future higher standard of living, so to speak. So
Absolutely.
yep. So thank you everyone for being patient and my word salad and all the things today. I really appreciate it, and I also know that it's close to we're in the holiday season right now, so just you being here with me, um, you know, it makes my holiday for sure. So I appreciate it.
Yep, only 8 days away from Christmas. That's pretty crazy. But yeah, we definitely appreciate you again, Sarah. Thank you so much for coming on again and giving us all this great information. Um, I hope Sarah could kind of also, it is a lot of information. It can seem overwhelming, but I hope she presents it in a very encouraging way. So don't be discouraged and think that, like she said, your child can't work and you don't want to mess anything up. And you can do it the right way and it can be done. So we appreciate you all joining, and we appreciate Sarah again. And like I said, if you're going to get some more information in our email, and if you would like a certificate, you can request that by sending me an email. So hope you all have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and have a great rest of your Wednesday. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank